Before we get into today's episode, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to everyone listening around the world. It genuinely still amazes me how far this show is reaching. So a few shout outs this week to Connor listening in Glasgow, Jennifer in Ipswich, Jake tuning in from London, Amy in Nottingham and Ryan in Leeds. And I've also got messages come through from Daniel in Toronto, Marcus in Sydney, Alina in Brazil, Chris in Cape Town, and Noah listening in Los Angeles, which is incredible. Thank you so much. If you're listening right now, wherever you are in the world, let me know. I genuinely love seeing how global this community has become. You can find us on all the socials. Just look for What They Hide Pod, and our email address is in the show notes if you want to contact us that way. And if you enjoy the show, don't forget to follow, leave a review, and share the episode. It really helps more people discover the podcast. Alright, let's crack on with the show. This episode contains discussion of death and themes that some listeners may find unsettling. It also explores unresolved circumstances and investigative details that may be disturbing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. It starts with something small, something easy to ignore, a smell. At first, it's faint, the kind of thing you notice and then dismiss. Maybe something left out, maybe nothing at all. But it doesn't go away. It lingers in the hallway just outside a flat. A place where nothing unusual is supposed to happen. A secure building, central London, clean, ordered, routine. And yet, something feels off. There's a knock. No answer. Another knock. Still nothing. Inside, silence. At some point, a decision is made, because something isn't right. And when something isn't right, you don't leave it. The door opens, and at first, nothing looks wrong. The air is still, too still. No movement, no sound. Just a flat that looks exactly as it should. Someone steps inside, careful, taking it in, looking for something obvious, something that explains the smell. The living room, nothing out of place. Kitchen, clean, undisturbed. Bedroom, normal. Everything exactly where it should be. And yet, the feeling doesn't go away. Because something is pulling attention. Not visually, not immediately, but instinctively toward one place. The bathroom door opens. And for a moment, there's nothing. Just a bathtub. White, still, and then it's seen. A bag, red, positioned inside the bath, not thrown, not discarded, placed, and something shifts, because now there is a focus, a detail that doesn't belong. They step closer. The bag is zipped, tightly, carefully, locked. And there is a moment, just before it's opened, where everything pauses. because something about this doesn't feel right. Inside the bag is a body, folded, compressed, contained within something far too small. And in that instant, everything changes, because this is no longer a concern, no longer a possibility. This is a scene, one that doesn't make sense. How did he get inside? How was the bag closed? How was it locked? There are no signs of a struggle, no disturbance in the flat, no indication that anyone else was there, no forced entry, no witnesses, nothing. And the man inside that bag is not just anyone. He is intelligent, private, working in a role that is never fully explained, connected to agencies that do not speak publicly. A secure building, a locked apartment, a locked bag, and a body inside it. And this is where it stops being a scene and becomes something else. Because the more you look at it, the less it makes sense. Because this isn't just unusual. It's not just suspicious. It's impossible. And every explanation only makes it harder to believe. This is what they hide. Hidden crimes in plain sight. To understand what happened in that flat, you have to understand the man inside it, because nothing about his life suggests how it ended. His name was Gareth Williams, and for most of his life he existed quietly. He was intelligent, exceptionally so, the kind of man that sees pattern where others don't. Mathematics, logic, structure, things that follow rules, things that make sense. But outside of that, there is very little. No loud personality, no public presence, no need for attention. He lived alone, kept to himself, routine, predictable. His work is harder to define. Not because it didn't exist, but because it wasn't something that was spoken about openly. He worked with intelligence agencies, including GCHQ, and had connections to MI6, roles that involve information, analysis, details that are not shared publicly. In that world, you don't talk about what you do. You don't explain your work. You don't bring it home with you. Everything is controlled, contained, separate. At the time of his death, he was living in London, on a secondment, working away from his usual base in a city that moves constantly, but in a life that did not. He had routines, habits, patterns, the kind of structure that makes life predictable. Work, home, alone. And that's what stands out. Not what is there, but what isn't. No chaos, no signs of risk, no indication of anything that would lead to that scene. Because when you place his life next to the way it ended, they don't align at all. And that's where the discomfort begins, Because if nothing in his life suggests what happened, then where does the explanation come from? There are no obvious answers, no clear narrative, just a man who lived quietly and died in a way that doesn't fit. Because sometimes the most unsettling cases are not the ones filled with chaos. They're the ones where everything seems normal, until it suddenly isn't. Next, we return to the flat and look at the scene again, not as a discovery, but as evidence. Now we go back inside to take a look at the scene, because everything that matters is already there. The flat is small, contained, nothing excessive, everything in its place, no signs of disturbance, no overturned furniture, no broken objects, no indication that anything violent has happened. The front door shows no damage, no forced entry, no sign that anyone broke in, which means one of two things. Either he was alone, or whoever was there was allowed in. The air is still, not just quiet, still, the kind of stillness that suggests nothing has moved. Nothing has been interrupted. The focus returns to the bathroom, because that's where everything leads. The bathtub and the bag. It's a North Face holdall, red, not large, not something designed to hold a person, and yet that's exactly what it contains. The bag is inside the bath, not wedged, not forced, placed carefully, as if it was meant to be there. The zips are closed, fully, secured, and more than that, the bag is locked from the outside. And this is where the problem begins, because once the bag is locked, there is no way out. Not from the inside, not without help. Inside, his body is folded, compressed into a space that should not fit, positioned in a way that raises immediate questions, not about what happened, but how was it even possible? There are no fingerprints of a third party, no clear DNA pointing to someone else, no sign of a struggle inside the flat. No defensive injuries, nothing that clearly indicates another person was there. Time has passed, enough for the environment to change, for the scene to become harder to interpret, for details to blur, and that matters, because it makes certainty even harder to reach. Investigators attempt to recreate the scenario, to understand if it's possible, to test the theory. Could someone place themselves in the bag and lock it from within? Attempts are made, repeated, carefully controlled, and the conclusion is unclear, because while parts of it may be possible, the full sequence doesn't quite work. The timeline is incomplete. Gaps, missing pieces, moments that cannot be fully accounted for. And without a clear timeline, the scene becomes even more difficult to explain. A locked apartment, a locked bag, no witnesses, no clear sequence of events, and no explanation that fits all the evidence. And this is where it becomes something else, Because this is no longer just a scene, it's a puzzle, one where every piece exists, but doesn't quite fit together. Because when you look at it closely, nothing is missing, and yet nothing makes sense. Next, the investigation begins, and with it, the first theories, the first explanations, and the first signs that this case is far from straightforward. At first, the expectation is simple. This will make sense. Every scene does. Every case has a sequence, a cause, an explanation, and the job of the investigation is to find it. Officers arrive. The flat is secured. The scene is processed, step by step, nothing rushed, nothing assumed, because the details matter. And in a case like this, every detail matters. The first question is always the same. Was anyone else involved? Because if someone else was in that flat, then everything changes. Was it forced entry? No. The door is intact. No damage, no sign of intrusion, which suggests whoever might have been there didn't need to force their way in. Or there was no one there. CCTV cameras are checked. Entry points, corridors, outside the building. And what they show is limited. No clear footage of someone entering, no clear footage of someone leaving, nothing that explains what happened inside. Time becomes the next focus. When was he last seen? When was he last heard from? How long had he been in that flat? But the answers don't line up cleanly. There are gaps, periods of time that cannot be fully accounted for, and without a clear timeline, everything else becomes harder to place. Investigators begin to consider something difficult. Could he have done this himself? Could he have entered the bag, closed it, and locked it, without assistance? Tests are carried out, carefully, repeatedly, trying to replicate the sequence, to understand if it's physically possible. Some elements can be recreated, but not all, not cleanly, not convincingly, because the final step, the locking mechanism, raises questions that don't have clear answers. If not self-inflicted, then someone else must be involved. But that creates a different problem. Where is the evidence? No fingerprints, no DNA, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, nothing to suggest another person was there. And then there is his work. Connections to GCHQ, links to MI6, a world that is not fully visible, a world where information is controlled, where details are not always shared, and that introduces another possibility, one that is harder to prove, harder to dismiss, and far more complex. Because now, the investigation is split. Two possibilities, neither of them fully supported, neither of them fully explained, and both of them deeply unsatisfying. This is where the case becomes difficult, because every avenue leads somewhere, but not far enough. Every answer creates another question. Every theory leaves something unresolved. There is no clear narrative, no sequence that fits every piece of evidence, no explanation that removes the doubt, just possibilities and uncertainty, because the more the investigation continues, the clearer one thing becomes. This is not a case that will be easily explained. Next, the theories, the possibilities, and the explanations that attempt to make sense of something that may not make sense at all. At some point, every investigation reaches the same place. When the evidence doesn't give you a clear answer, you turn to possibilities, not guesses, not assumptions, theories built from what is known, tested against what isn't. And in this case, none of them are comfortable. The first explanation is the simplest, that Gareth Williams entered the bag himself, alone, that this was an accident, a scenario that went wrong. It suggests that he climbed into the holdall, pulled the zips closed, and somehow secured it from the inside. But there are issues, because the bag wasn't just closed, it was locked from the outside. And that changes everything. Attempts were made to recreate it, to see if it could be done, if someone could enter the bag, zip it, lock it, without assistance. Some parts were possible, but not all. Not in a way that matched the scene exactly. Not in a way that removed doubt. And so the theory remains. Possible, but incomplete. The second theory is unavoidable. That someone else was there. That someone placed him inside the bag, closed it, locked it, and left. It explains the lock, it explains the positioning, it explains what seems impossible to do alone. But again, there are issues. No sign of forced entry, no disturbance in the flat, no evidence of a struggle, no fingerprints, no DNA pointing clearly to another person, nothing that proves someone else was there. And that absence matters. Because in most cases, something is left behind. A trace, a mistake. But here, there's nothing. And then there is the third possibility. The one that is harder to define, harder to prove, and harder to dismiss completely. Gareth Williams worked with GCHQ and had links to MI6, environments that deal with information, with secrecy, with things that are not always visible to the public, that his work may have played a role, that something connected to that world may explain what happened. But this theory has the same issue as the others. There is no clear evidence, nothing that confirms it, nothing that fully connects the scene to anything beyond the flat. And this is where the case becomes something else, because every theory explains something, but none of them explain everything. The accident theory struggles with the lock. The second person theory struggles with the lack of evidence. The intelligence theory struggles with proof. And this is where you are now. Standing in the same place investigators stood. Looking at the same details, hearing the same possibilities, and trying to decide which explanation makes sense. But the truth is, none of them fully do, not completely, not without leaving something unanswered. Because this isn't a case where everything fits. It isn't a case where the pieces lock into place. It's a case where the pieces exist, but refuse to form a clear picture. And that's what makes it so difficult. Not just what happened, but the fact that even now, there is no explanation that satisfies every detail. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden, it's just out of reach. Next, the official findings and the conclusion that doesn't feel like one. Eventually, the investigation reaches a point where it has to stop. Not because every question has been answered, but because every avenue has been explored. And what remains is uncertainty. An inquest is opened, a formal process designed to examine the facts, to establish what happened, to reach a conclusion. This isn't a police investigation anymore. This is public, transparent, evidence laid out, tested, questioned. The same details are presented again. The flat, the bag, the lock, the lack of evidence pointing clearly in any direction. Each piece examined carefully, each one carrying weight, but none of them providing certainty. At the centre of the inquest is the same question. How did Gareth Williams end up inside that bag? The possibility that he entered the bag himself is considered again. In detail, examined, tested, but the same problems remain. The locking mechanism, the physical constraints, the lack of clear, repeatable explanation. The possibility of another person is also considered, because it explains things the accident theory cannot. The lock, the positioning, the containment. But again, there is no evidence, no clear indication that anyone else was present, no trace, no confirmation. Experts are brought in, forensic specialists, analysts, people who examine the details from every angle, and even here there is no complete agreement. Some believe aspects of the scene suggest external involvement. Others maintain that while unlikely, self-confinement cannot be entirely ruled out. At the centre of it all is the coroner, tasked with reaching a conclusion. Not speculation, not theory, a finding. And the conclusion that emerges is careful, measured, but deeply unsatisfying, because the coroner rejects the idea that this was a simple accident, rejects the explanation that everything can be accounted for by self-confinement. Instead, the conclusion is this: that Gareth Williams was unlawfully killed. Unlawfully, which means another person may have been involved. That something happened in that flat that cannot be explained as an accident. And yet, no one is identified. No one is charged. No clear sequence of events is established. No explanation is provided that resolves the case. So what remains is a conclusion without closure, a finding without an answer. Because this is where it becomes hardest to accept. Not what happened, but that even after everything, there is still no clear explanation. The case remains unsolved, not officially closed, not officially understood, just incomplete. Because even with all the evidence laid out, all the theories explored, all the possibilities considered, there is still a gap, a missing piece, something that prevents this from making sense. And that is what makes this case so difficult. Not just what happened, but the fact that we may never fully know. Up to this point, everything has been contained. A flat, a room, a bag, a single impossible scene. But for some, that was never the full story. Because Gareth Williams wasn't just anyone. He worked with GCHQ and had links to MI6, organisations that operate in a world most people never see. A world built on information, on secrecy, on things that are not always explained. And when someone from that world dies in a way that doesn't make sense, people begin to ask different questions. Not just how it happened, but why. Early on, there were suggestions that this might not be accidental, that it might not be isolated, that it might be connected to his work. And that's where one of the most persistent theories emerges, that foreign intelligence may have been involved, often pointing towards Russia, a country with a long history of intelligence operations, of covert activity, of actions that leave very little trace. Because from a distance, some aspects of the case feel unusual. The lack of evidence, the absence of forced entry, the controlled nature of the scene, details that don't fit easily into a simple explanation. And for some, that raises the possibility that this was something more deliberate, more calculated. But like everything else in this case, there is no proof, no confirmed link, no evidence that connects his death to any foreign intelligence service. And this is where it becomes important to understand why theories like this appear. Because when a case has no clear answer, people search for one. When something feels impossible, people look for explanations that match that feeling. And when secrecy already exists, it creates space for speculation, space for ideas that cannot be easily confirmed or completely dismissed. Because now the case is no longer just about a room or a bag or a single moment, it becomes something larger, something that reaches beyond the scene itself. But it's important to return to what we know. There is no confirmed evidence that Gareth Williams' death was the result of espionage. No official finding that supports that conclusion. No clear link between his work and what happened in that flat. And yet, the questions remain, because nothing else fully explains it either. And that's what keeps these theories alive, not because they've been proven, but because nothing else has been. Because when the truth is unclear, the possibilities expand, and some of them reach far beyond the room. Next, we step back and ask the question that remains: what does this case tell us about the things we think we understand? In the end, we are left with a room, a flat in the centre of a city, secure, undisturbed, ordinary. Nothing about it stands out. No broken door, no signs of violence, no evidence that something forced its way in. Just a space that looks exactly as it should. And yet, inside that space, something happened that we still can't explain. A red holdall placed in a bathtub, zipped, locked, containing a man who should not be in there, who could not leave, and who, somehow, got inside. How? It's a simple question, a basic one. And yet, it has never been answered. Not fully. Not in a way that satisfies every detail. Because all the pieces are there. The room, the bag, the timeline, the tests, the findings. Everything that should lead to a conclusion. And still, there is none. Was he alone? Was someone else there? Was this an accident, or something else entirely? Every possibility has been examined, tested, questioned, and each one falls short. Because this isn't a case defined by what we know, it's defined by what we don't. The gap between the evidence and the explanation, the space where certainty should exist but doesn't. And that's what stays with you. Not just the image, not just the details, but the absence of an answer. Because we expect things like this to make sense. We expect there to be a reason, a sequence, a truth we can point to and say, that's what happened. But sometimes, the truth never arrives. Sometimes, the pieces don't come together. And sometimes, what happened remains just out of reach. And that raises something deeper. Because if something like this can happen in a secure building, in a controlled environment, without a clear explanation, then what does that say about how much we really understand? Because the most unsettling part of this case is not just the mystery, it's the possibility that there may never be an answer. And somewhere in that flat, in that locked room, the truth still exists. We just don't know what it is. This is what they hide. Hidden crimes in plain sight.